Welcome to our first Long Island Web Professionals Meetup. I'm really excited to be here today. Really excited to see more of a general kind of group going on here. My name's Selvaggio, and I've been running the Long Island Drupal users group for 4 years now, which I can't believe it's been that long. I thought it was 2 years this morning, and then Mike's telling me it's actually 4. So I'm here today to talk about Docker and kind of just really an introduction to Docker. I'm not really going to be diving too deeply into any given piece of it. But the goal of this talk is really for you to walk away with a kind of an interest in what Docker is, and hopefully fuel you guys with a little bit of knowledge to play around and learn some more. So I put together this presentation. It's the first time I'm doing this. I'm hoping I can kind of do it at other venues too. So I'm definitely looking forward to feedback from you guys. It took a little bit of, there's been a lot of PyCon talks about introduction to Docker, so I took a lot of pieces from the last couple of PyCon talks. And I'm also experimenting with Reveal.js for this presentation. So I got a couple of different things going on. It may fail on us. We'll see. So a little bit about you first. Just kind of got to meet a couple of folks. How many people here consider themselves developers, technical developers? OK. All right, cool. So most of the room. How many people here consider themselves non-technical, more of the biz dev side? All right, cool. Cool. All right. For the developers, PHP people. Not a lot. All right, a couple. Ruby people. A couple of Rubies. All right, all right. Straight JavaScript. All right, all the above. All right. Cool. All right, a little bit about myself. I run Sego Solutions, which is a Drupal-focused development firm here on the island. We're a small shop. I actually still do it on the side. During the day, I'm an IT director for American Diagnostic Corporation, which is a medical device manufacturer here on the island. Been into web development pretty much most of my life, since high school, and it's really just a passion of mine. I mean, some people ask me, how do I go home and actually do web development? I don't really look at it as too much of a job. If I can do it and people pay me to do it and I'm learning stuff, this is the life I want to live. I love it. It's great. So we've been focused mostly on Drupal for a pretty long time now. Came onto Docker about say maybe a year and a half ago or so, just about when they open sourced Docker, the Doc Cloud. And we developed a site called Try Drupal 8. It was a complete experiment for us to see how we can leverage Docker to spin up Drupal 8 instances quickly. And it's up now, trydrupal8.com, and it's been actually pretty widely used for people trying the platform. So what is Docker exactly? I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what Docker is. And quite honestly, sometimes I find myself getting confused. I'm like, I still have a lot to learn about this platform. And it's changing so frequently, being that it's a very fast-moving open source project. So from docker.com, they're saying that Docker is an open platform for developers and system admins to build, ship, and distribute applications. OK. So what does that really mean? Now, I'm looking at this pretty much from a technical perspective. Docker is fundamentally a usability layer on top of containers. And we're seeing a lot about containers today, containerized technologies, containerizing your apps. Docker's become so popular now that we're using the term Dockerize our apps and things like that. What Docker does, it basically is exposing this layer of containers to us in a much easier fashion than it used to be. Before Docker, and this kind of stuff that I'm going to show you was possible before Docker, and some people have used it, companies like Heroku and things like that. You'd have to interface directly with these layers in the operating system. And that's like a black art that was pretty hard to understand. Docker was developed as kind of a layer on top of that to make it much more approachable to use containers. And container technology, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but it's primarily a Linux technology built on top of these sets of technologies within the Linux kernel. Okay. Docker is written in Go, which Actually, I'd love to see a talk on Go here eventually. Go is a really interesting programming language developed at Google. I'm kind of just diving into some of that now, and it's pretty interesting, like the whole concurrency models and things like that. So a little history before I dive into containers a little more. Docker was developed at a company called .cloud. It was an internal project that they used. They were basically like a Heroku competitor. They were a platform as a service company, and they enabled you to go on there and say, I need a MySQL instance, I need a PHP instance, and I want a web server. And then they'd spin up containers for you, and you'd be able to host your application within it. That business is pretty competitive now, and they saw that the platform that they've developed may be useful to the general public. So they open sourced it in March of 2013. And during that time, it's grown exponentially in its community. And it now has thousands of contributors. It's one of the most widely favorited projects on GitHub today. And the community is it's really growing. And that's really kind of an attribute I look for in a lot of open source projects is a large, vibrant community, which is one of the reasons that kind of got me involved with Drupal to begin with, which was a really helpful community. It wasn't like, you're a noob, get out of here type of thing. It's kind of a, warm and welcoming, which I'm trying to foster here on Long Island. 1.0 was released in 2014 in June. And currently we're on 1.6. With each point release, we're seeing a lot of new things roll in. And it's really kind of interesting being involved with Docker so early and hitting a lot of the issues that, well, why can't I just remove this container and do this? And then the next version is, OK, there's a command for that now. Oh, yes, I don't have to do that anymore. That's great. So it's really kind of, it's moving quick, and a lot of the issues are being addressed. So what are containers exactly? Basically, containers are a way to isolate processes on a host operating system. Okay, now this is different from the idea of a virtual machine. A virtual machine, which is, how many people here use virtual machines today for various different things? All right, good amount of folks. Virtual machines, as most of you are probably aware, is that they run a full operating system on top of the host operating system, which is running on top of a hypervisor. Companies like VMware and things like that got really big from this type of technology. Containers and the idea of Linux containers allow us to run those same processes that would run in our virtual machine, but run it on the host machine, but containerized and protected from the actual host processes. So think of things like running a C++ program or running a PHP program within its own space where you can't affect the actual host processes, but you're running basically on the hardware. You're not running on top of a hypervisor and another OS. So to illustrate that, I have to have this graph. We have, in our traditional kind of VM mindframe, we've got this hypervisor layer on top of our host OS, and we've got all these guest OSs on top of it. As you can imagine, this is a very heavy operation. If we want to keep spinning up different virtual machines, we need to basically take up all that space to have a whole running OS. With the Docker model, and really with the container model, is we take this layer out, and we're running our applications and our processes directly on the host operating system. So what does this do for us besides just freeing up a lot of resources? Containers spin up a lot faster, which is what enabled us to really try Drupal 8 going, where you click a button and boom, you have your own isolated environment of Drupal in literally a second. That started MySQL and a bunch of other different processes, as opposed to waiting for the actual VM to spin up, which can take a minute or so to actually do. OK, so why should we care about this technology? As developers, there's a couple of different really exciting things that are coming out of this. We can develop, using Docker technology, we can develop with production configuration right on our machines here. So we can have the entire stack essentially all isolated within our application. So we can share that entire stack with other developers on our team. We can push that entire stack up to a testing server, and it can be tested with the full configuration of that stack. Really trying to solve that problem of, well, it worked on my machine, why isn't it working on yours? It works fine. It must be something with your host. This kind of takes that out of the equation. That isn't the first type of technology to do that. Using virtual machines, technologies like Vagrant and things like that have addressed this issue as well. I think Docker is kind of maturing into a pretty elegant way to solve this. Yeah, kind of talked about the second point there. The third point, for me, is really interesting. I really enjoy trying different technologies, different open source projects, and tinkering with them, playing with them, see if they can be useful for my organization, and see if we can actually build value with people with these technologies. Part of that process is learning how to actually set up the technology. What do I need a MySQL server? Do I need a Redis cache? Do I need what version of the JVM do I need to be running to be able to run this? All these different things come up when you're looking at a new technology. With Docker, everybody's sharing these things called Docker files, which basically contain the recipes to build the entire infrastructure around your application. And with a couple of commands, as I'm going to demonstrate, you'll have the whole stack running in a couple of minutes. So as an example, just recently, we're exploring ways to improve our continuous integration processes. And we're exploring Jenkins, which is a tool we haven't really used too much. And I really, at this point, I wasn't really too interested in diving into setting up the JVM and doing all that stuff. So I said, hey, let me see if there's a Docker image out there for that. So there's something called the Docker registry, which allows you to share already built containers and pull them down. So I pulled that down, and in a couple of seconds, literally, I was running a full Jenkins stack, and I was able to get right into Jenkins and start playing with it. We put that up on a free Amazon AWS host, and now we're actually doing a couple of little things with it at this point. So with Docker, and I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but with Docker, the workflow of us as developers change a bit. Traditionally, this is my first experiment with a reveal. There should be a video behind there. Yes, there is. Thank you to Platform SH. I kind of stole that video from them. So the current workflow, it typically looks like this, right? We have our local stack, which contains all of the technologies that we're using to actually develop our software, be it MySQL, PHP, Rails, whatever. We take that, we run it, then we push it up to our version control system, be it Git or Mercurial, and then our testing server, if we have one, kicks into play, pulls down our code, does our tests, either puts a little green dot on our repo saying we've passed or not, and if we've passed, we can then pull that code down to production. Okay, now this is a simplified example of what's actually happening here, but the basic workflow kind of looks like this, right? Now, with Docker, it looks a little bit different. We've got our local stack, which each process that we're running is running a container, which contains the specific processes that we integrate with. So in one example, we may look at, this may be MySQL, this may be PHP, and this may be Nginx or Apache. Then, once we have everything working on our host machine, we commit that to our Git repo, which contains the Docker file that specifies how we build all those containers and the connections between them. Now our testing server can pull down all that information with that Docker file, can build that same exact environment and test it. So we're testing with the same, exact same versions of every single tool that we have. So the example of it worked on my machine. If I got one version of, if I have one version of MySQL here and one version here, we know those versioning issues aren't going to happen if we're specifying them in our Docker file. Now once, and this is where it kind of gets a little interesting, once everything passes, we can push that version up to our Docker registry. Now this is going to contain what's called the image, which is really the artifact of a working version of our infrastructure. We can now take that and deploy that into production. Now there's ways, obviously, our local stack configuration may not be the same as our production, right? In most cases, it's probably not. So there's ways to pull in different configurations and things like that. And there's some pretty interesting tooling being developed now to be able to scale a lot of these different things. Say, for example, in production, I have 5 webheads and a couple of database backends and some additional caching. There's ways to actually do some of that. So for sysadmins, and this is kind of blending the idea of DevOps, right? I mean, in the DevOps world, we see Docker coming up pretty much all the time now. So for sysadmins, I think we're getting a much better way to define our environments. How many people here use Puppet or Chef to provision servers? No one. Okay, cool. I don't either. So with those tools, you actually have to learn a new syntax. I think one of them may be Ruby, but you need to learn a new syntax to define what your environments are going to look like. And they're building full VMs. With Docker files, as I'll show you, they're pretty much glorified bash scripts, whatever operating system that you're running on. So there's a couple of keywords, and then you're running some provisioning commands, which is basically just bash. So like I showed in those previous pieces, the test environments and just the general portability of your applications increases, because now we're just sharing that single Docker file, and that's it. We're not sharing a full-blown VM that you need to pull down and all that. And we can scale a lot easier. So there's some really interesting things that Docker, which, by the way, .cloud changed their name to Docker. So they sold the platform as a service business, and now they're focusing solely on Docker. They've got a pretty highly experienced management team involved now, and they're really trying to scale out, just focused on Docker. And they're developing a bunch of tools, Docker Machine, Docker Swarm, and Docker Compose, that enable us to define ways to scale across different cloud providers. So we can say things like, I need 4 web heads on DigitalOcean in their New York City data center, or I need to distribute that between Amazon and DigitalOcean, and things like that. So it's kind of cool. So how do we use Docker? Docker can be installed on all major platforms. This is kind of a running joke. It can be installed on all major platforms as long as you're running it on Linux. So it really just runs on Linux. So when you're running on Windows or on a Mac, as you'll see, I'm actually running a single VM that's running Linux that's actually running Docker on top of that. So Docker is primarily Linux right now. They're trying to work on ways to actually diversify that, but it's Linux at this time. So the idea is that we have our Docker client, which is a command line tool, and it's also a RESTful API that we can access. Our host. So we have our Docker host, and on our Docker host, the Docker daemon runs, which listens and responds to our requests. And we have our running containers, and on our Docker registry, we have all of our stored images. So the images and the containers are a really important kind of terminology here that I'll go into. Images are used to store your application. So this is kind of the fermented version of your application that you push up to the registry. Okay, this is got everything. And typically the size of these images are kind of VME sized. They'll be 400, 500 megs depending on what's in your image. Containers are really, you can think of them as an instance of your actual image. That's the running image. Okay. Okay, so let's enough of this talk and stuff. Let's see what this is all about. So what I did was I set up, and like I said, this is kind of let me get out of this. I set this up over the past couple of days, so it may be a little bumpy, but I set up a project. It's on GitHub, which I'll share my GitHub account in a minute, to learn Docker. And it's got a bunch of different basic Docker images that we kind of pull down and play with. Very simple, enabling you to kind of just get your feet wet. But before I go into some of that stuff, I want to show off. Can you guys, let me make this a little bigger. Yeah, if you want to get it real dramatic in here. Can you guys see that, or should I? Is that better? Let me get you a solid background there. Okay. So most of the stuff I'm going to be showing off is going to be on the command line. The Docker tool, the Docker client itself, is on the command line. So the first concept that we're talking about is an image. This is the fermented version of our application. So if I do, where did I go? Where am I? Let me tighten it up a little bit. Okay. So if I do Docker images, you'll see these are all the images that I currently have on my machine. So these are, you can see the size that they are and things like that. Now, if I wanted to run one of these images, like one of them is Ubuntu, right? Just the classic Ubuntu system. Now, if I wanted to run it, I could say run Ubuntu echo hello. So now this example isn't all too exciting, and I'm not sure it does a really good job illustrating it, but what I just did was I ran echo hello within Ubuntu, not on my host machine. That actually executed within a running container that is Ubuntu. So how can I illustrate that a little bit better? So if I run Ubuntu again, but we run it interactively, and I run bash. Now I just started up, Ubuntu just started up, and now I'm inside of an Ubuntu container running. So if I click an LSSL, I am in a completely new system now. Just that fast it's spun up. We're not going to be able to do that with a virtual machine, which I think is pretty exciting. So now, we can, I could do like a apt-get update, go out there and, update my box. Looks like it's not going to work.
Yeah, well, that's guess probably is not going to let you
Yeah.
out.
Okay. So you can see there that that's a pretty quick example. Now we can do other pretty cool things. Like if I wanted to say Docker run, I have Jenkins down on here. So let's do. Where's my Jenkins? There it is. Okay, so now if I do a Docker PS, we can see our running applications. When I did an echo hello, the container stopped right away because it was running that one command, which was echo. It was hello, and then it stopped. When I'm running other containers, like I just started up Jenkins, Jenkins actually, the way you set up the containers, it's running an actual kind of a server situation where it's still running and things are listening. I have some ports mapped so I can access this Jenkins instance. In my browser. And where am I running it? At 8080. So 192.168, 8080. Whoops. And there we go. So now on my host machine, I'm running a container that's running Jenkins within Ubuntu, which is kind of cool. Now I could stop these containers and, take the container ID. Whoops, 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 whoops. Hold on, let me get out of here. Abort. Okay, just going to grab this ID, and then I'll stop it. Okay, so now that container stopped. Okay, so that's cool. We can quickly spin up containers and get, running stacks of various different things. But now, how do we actually share this? How do we make this more portable? I'm running images that I've already pulled down from the Docker registry. So let's take a look at Docker files. Docker files are the files that allow us to define the environment our applications actually run in. So here's a really simple example of it. Okay. So this is saying from Ubuntu, and I'm running a command hello Docker. So it's doing exactly the same thing I just showed you on the command line, but it's actually doing it within Docker file. So I could take this Docker file, commit it into Git, share it with my team. They can grab it down, and they'll be able to actually run this. I'm not going to run this one because it's not very interesting. Here's the next app, the Fortune app, which gives us a little bit of flavor as to what's going on. So we can, from Ubuntu, we're adding in our container, our start sh script, which actually starts some things up. It configures our environment and things like that. It's going out, it's running apt-get update, it's changing some permissions, and then we're running our start script. What this does is it runs the Fortune app and pipes it to Cause, which is kind of cool. No, I got to rebuild it, so I won't do that. Well, actually, yeah, let me build that. Okay. So I can build this container by just saying docker build /t Fortune app. It's going to go out there. It's going to read the file, and it's actually going to build it. That's going to take some time because it's doing an apt-get update. So I'll move on to the next one. Now, what we can do is we can leverage things that have already been done and then build on top of those. This is an example of that. So this is a full stack development environment, which we grabbed from the TumTum, which is a startup focused on building different Docker containers. I mean, we're pulling down WordPress. So what I can do is run. Actually, let me get into my lab environment and full stack. Okay. And I'm going to build WordPress. Nope. I'm screwing up over here, guys. Okay, so now I can run WordPress. The live demos never go good. So the bottom line is we can run a full stack of MySQL, PHP, and all of that within the actual container itself. Now this is kind of a different, we're not supposed to really do this in Docker, and I didn't really want to show it off too much. But a lot of people are doing it. The idea is to containerize all of your processes and connect them together. So that's kind of a later discussion. That could be a whole nother talk. So that is pretty much the demo here. Rich, you had mentioned bringing in different configuration files, and that kind of is illustrated within the this application, which we're bringing in the start.sh into the /start.sh. So if we had Nginx running within this, we can actually bring in our Nginx configuration into our container and have our Nginx within this application itself, our nginx.config. I think that's a confusion for a lot of folks. Okay, so I want to have enough time for some questions, some further exploration. These tools seem really cool right now to be able to scale applications across different cloud hosting providers. And we're currently working on a startup now called stackstarter.io. It's leveraging Docker and various other technologies to spin up full development environments in the cloud. You have your full IDE and all that, all within the browser, making it really easy to kind of approach and learn new technologies. So we're looking for beta testers. It would be awesome if you guys checked it out. We're in kind of a pre-launch mode right now. So any questions?
When would I not want to use Docker?
That's a good question. I think if you've got a pretty solid continuous integration infrastructure in place already, using Vagrant and those type of tools, you really want to think long and hard about switching all that over to Docker. Other than that, I mean, if you're just approaching DevOps now, I don't think you can ignore Docker at this time. So that would probably be my advice initially.
Is there anything that it's bad at, or can I just throw anything at it?
Honestly, I'm having a lot of trouble with PHP applications right now. A lot of newer kind of stacks like Node and things like that, we can run the process as the initial process. So I can run Node as the initial process it runs, and then link in the different containers. By linking, it's setting environment variables that the entry point process can access. With PHP, it's different. The way it integrates with the actual web server, using PHP FPM, I'm kind of onto something with that, where you have PHP FPM running and you can listen on on a socket and connect between the two. But right now, for a lot of our PHP stuff, which is most of the Drupal stuff that we're doing, it's these kind of full monolithic containers, which is something we don't want to be doing.
I mean, I'll tell you, we have a pretty big CI operation, and we're moving it to Docker. You know, we use Vagrant virtual boxes, but we're moving it all to Docker.
Yeah. And what's the drivers?
At this point, it's just smarter. It's just easier. I mean, we have a whole PHP Storm integration as well. So I mean, there are obviously still some issues with it, but we're really looking to invest in it. And we've already got the CI infrastructure. It's just
Interesting. A lot of cost savings with it, or is it because you don't have to have all that?
just efficiencies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just efficiencies.
Cool. Any other questions?
You mentioned you put Jenkins up on a micro instance on AWS. Have you done anything with multiple instances, like deploying, whether in recognizing that Amazon just introduced their own container service? Have you used implemented a multi-tier sort of stack in AWS, running across spanning multiple EC2 instances?
Not spanning multiple EC2 instances, no. We are doing some stuff with Docker Compose, which was formerly Fig. They acquired them. Ways to define YAML files and define your infrastructure and links between the different containers. I believe there's ways you can define where those containers actually run, so you don't have to run them on the same host. Yeah, I think Docker Fig and Docker Compose is probably your area of exploration there.
Great.
Any other questions?
You mentioned separating the processes into separate containers and then linking them together.
Yes.
But along with that, correct me if I'm wrong, you said that you're not supposed to do that?
No, I think that's where the energy is going. I think that's what you want to do. You don't want to have these monolithic containers where I'm doing, installing MySQL and Nginx and everything on one container. And honestly, a lot of the stuff, as you dive into Docker, when it first came out, I'm to blame too. When it first came out, we got really excited about this idea of being able to package up everything into a container. And a lot of the stuff you're going to find out there today is kind of all these monolithic containers. But the energy is diversifying away from that and saying, no, just individualize your containers and things like that. Individualize your processes and containerize those.
Have you played with Kubernetes at all?
No.
And I'm not quite sure what it is. I think Google introduced it. I know it has some relation to Docker. I'm just curious if you could speak to it.
Yeah, no, Kubernetes, I've never even heard of it. Gotta check it out. Cool. Yeah, so I mean, I can, this is a huge topic, and I was pretty ambitious with what I wanted to kind of approach with this. So, there's definitely a lot to learn. I'd be really interested to talk to other people about what we can do with this technology, where we can take it, and we can definitely have other talks about it in the future, I'm sure. So I've got a couple of branches on the Learn Docker project I put up. They're really basic Docker files if you want to start playing with it, and I definitely welcome any commits back to see if we can kind of build a little library of different kind of tools to learn Docker in the right way. A lot of the stuff out there is all this, like we were just talking about, the big monolithic containers. Anything else?
Curious, so you deploy your Docker files into production. How are you just deploying them on are you on any random distribution, I assume, like CentOS or Ubuntu?
Mostly Ubuntu, yeah, Ubuntu.
Interesting.
That's the host.
Any reason why that particular flavor?
Not really. I think just familiarity. I've got actually that WordPress instance, which is probably one of the reasons why it's failing on me, is on CentOS, and I kind of wanted to demonstrate that running different flavors of Linux is possible using this technology, and you can kind of have them side by side. So if your team is familiar with, Fedora or something like that, you could base it off of that. And those Docker files that I showed off, the run commands, everything after that is just all your bash stuff. So you have access to your host operating system's tool sets. All right, anything else?
If the hosts are wildly different, do you run into problems like if you're going between Debian and SUSE or something like that? Is there ever issue using the same container from one place to another?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think probably a rule of thumb right now is to stay with the same type of host. I'm not sure, and unless there's some clear benefits to it, having a container running on Ubuntu and then CentOS or something like that. Maybe if there's some specific tool you need to get or something that's not, but yeah.
I think size is the bigger issue in that case because
Is
you
it?
look at the images, it's a lot of space. You look, like images can take a lot of space on your computer. My computer whips. I was running Docker and I didn't realize how many images I was pulling. I killed 50 gigabytes of space on my computer in about a week.
Yeah,
So
I've done the same.
that was unexpected. Their images like Ubuntu, even though they're used for a lot of stuff, they take a lot of space just because all their software is pre-installed. So it's definitely good to look into like other distributions for that very reason. It's usually space that's the
Yeah.
issue.
There's some guys too doing base images that are really, really, really minimalistic, where they're actually, and I'm not really sure how they're doing this, but they're linking in all of the dependencies within the binaries and only bringing in those dependencies to run that specific binary that you're running. So you could do like a LDLS or whatever the command is to see what the binary is linked to, like a node app or something like that, and then just bringing in those specific pieces to run your base image. So you can make images really, really small. But you're right, space management right now in Docker is really kind of a mess.
It's atrocious. It's atrocious.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. Yeah.
It uses a layered file system, which is kind of interesting. Like there's a whole workflow of being able to commit your running instance, so that you can be working in it and you can run a commit against it, and then you can stop the instance and then start it again where you left off. So I kind of anticipate some like backup services happening, some businesses starting just focusing on that. But once you do that, every time you do that, you're creating a new layer in this layered file system. Yeah, you're just filling up your disk. That was a problem with Try Drupal 8, where we have people going there and just spinning instances, and then we kill them after 24 hours. In the beginning, we weren't removing them from disk because we didn't know we had to, and we were just stopping the containers. And then somebody would talk about it at a conference or something, and traffic would spike, and the site would go down in 3 seconds because disk space was filled up. So,
Yeah, I was curious. I've never played with Jenkins, but I was curious what your workflow is for an application that's in production and you want to push up a container up to production. What's the fastest way to get your tested container up to production?
honestly, I'm looking to learn that too. I don't think I'm probably the best to speak on that. We're just starting to play with Jenkins. But from what I understand, using a Docker registry is becoming kind of the best practice in the Docker space, where your testing server builds your image based on your Docker file, and then once it passes, it pushes, just like a Git push, it pushes that image up to your registry. And then your production environment, all you have to do is pass a single command on your production environment to pull back down that image, and then just restart the image like you're restarting a service.
Yeah, I've been cheating by just creating like a data container and then just pushing up code. Since like the application containers usually stay static for the most part. So I don't know, I tried the other way, kind of like what you were just talking about, but that just seems like a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah.
A lot to manage.
Yeah, I'd be interested to collaborate with you on that. I want to learn more about that myself.
And I'm sorry, you said to try out Learn Docker, if you could provide, is that a link or?
Yeah, the presentation and all the code for Learn Docker is on my GitHub here at /NickJS.
Sorry, not time's over, guys.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you.